Hello, and welcome to the Cultivating Confidence podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nicole Grams. I am a life coach who specializes in anxiety, health, and human design. And I also happen to be a functional medicine pharmacist. This podcast is a compilation of conversations that I've had with clients and colleagues. So listen in as we explore the mind, body, and soul's confidence in its many forms. You may have noticed in the past that I like to choose topics that I am personally working through with my own issues, and today is definitely one of those, and talking about impatience. And I am defining impatience as like the emotional response that happens when brain thinks something isn't happening fast enough. And it seems like a pretty simple definition, but I hadn't really thought about it until I started writing this outline for today. But there are many different flavors of impatience, and it can be impatience with others, like waiting for someone to arrive somewhere, or somebody's talking too much, not getting to the point, they haven't finished their task, you're waiting on them. It can be impatience with yourself, where like for me, especially, like I've had the impatience with my growth journey, not being, in a straight line, and it's taking too long to make the progress that I think I should be making. Maybe it's not losing weight fast enough. Maybe it's, not learning a skill fast enough, but basically things are not fast enough. And it could be like traffic, it could be situational. So like traffic, or waiting for food at a restaurant, or like the weather isn't cooperating and you're being impatient with the storm that's coming through, or whatever it is, right? So the emotional response can range from like mild irritation to absolute rage, depending on a lot of contributing factors. But notice that it's not always the same, even for the same situation. So, traffic one day might not be that big of a deal, but traffic the next day is like really just grates on you for some reason, right? And sometimes, I mean, we have a different emotional response, or at least a different like severity of emotional response, depending on a lot of different things. So, for me personally, the circumstance that I am talking about where I'm experiencing a lot of impatience, my partner and I have been working on some things with a wonderful couples therapist. And I noticed we've been in it for a couple months now, and I noticed my impatience bubbling up to the surface. And the observations that I made for myself were like my brain would get on a runaway train to nowhere good and tell me all about how my partner will never understand me the way I want him to. And like, we've identified the problem, I've expressed my desire. So, like, let's go. It's like 0 to 60. I'm ready. Let's dive in. Like, I know that the fastest way to get through this is to, dive straight in, dive deep, and get it done. Right. And in this thought error of mine, it kind of my brain defaulted to placing a lot of criticism and judgment on him, why he doesn't get it, why would he not want to dive in deep, right? Like, not paying attention to how I'm contributing to the issue, and I'm just feeling agitated and irritated about the situation, right? So I'm super frustrated and basically wanted to blow up about everything that I was feeling negative about the whole thing. And luckily, I had a coach who I was able to ask for help, and she was wonderful. And my request, I knew that it wasn't like a, how do I make him do this differently sort of thing. So I approached my coach with a request to help me shift my perspective of the situation. So I kind of got on my call, I word vomited for a bit, and then I had some realizations that she kind of helped me through. And one of the realizations was that part of the reason that we have a therapist in the first place is because our brains work very differently than one another, and she can help us sort things out, right? So my partner's brain is not the instant deep dive that mine is, because I'm like, okay, I'm ready, like, let's go, right? And it makes sense that I have the desire to dive in and swim through the muck, because I've done this a number of times before on different topics. And I understand that feeling wildly uncomfortable is part of it. And it feels so amazing once you get through it, right? But I'm very used to that discomfort with the vulnerability and the breakthrough, and he's not. And my brain is expecting him to respond exactly like I do. And that's not fair, right? It's not his job to do this at my pace. And together we have to go through this at whoever's pace is slower. And in this particular instance, it's him. And sometimes it's not him, sometimes it's me. But it's going to be a heck of a lot faster if I am not pushing so hard, right? Because if you can imagine being with a partner who is trying to push you through something, you want to hit the brakes, right? And in order to move forward faster, like the impatience is what's like stopping you from doing that, right? The hovering, the criticizing, the nudging, right? So my coach also reminded me that like we've got to break down the walls that we've built where they don't belong before we can see that the foundation is stable and then build back up with intention, right? And this is the part that really freaking sucks because it is deconstructing the things that we have put together in the last more than a decade that we've been together, right? So these are normal things that we think are normal that are getting in our way. And we have to deconstruct that and brick by brick. some of it you can take a wrecking ball to because you realize like this really isn't helpful. Like, let's move through this. But a lot of it is painstaking manual labor of deconstructing these walls brick by brick, kind of examining why they were there in the first place. And you get impatient at various points throughout this phase. It's very normal, right? People don't want to people tend to want to rush through the deconstruction to get to the end, but that's just not how it works, right? And another example, another circumstance where I noticed my impatience was actually earlier today. So I was in a restorative yin yoga class after a workout class that I had been to. And if you're not familiar with yin yoga, it's basically holding a position for sometimes like 5 minutes before changing. And I was set up in a position that was stretching my glutes and my outer thigh. And it's called pigeon if you're familiar with that. But I was impatient with how long it was taking to find ease in the pose. And then I was impatient with like how long it was taking for us to move on to the next thing. And this is like why yin yoga is such a head game, almost more, well, actually more so than the physical game, right? So you intentionally make yourself physically uncomfortable. You find your edge for some of the poses, and then you sit, right? And then you have to deal with the toddler brain that is running free on like how much this sucks and oh my gosh, I can't believe this and oh this kind of hurts. Like, but does it hurt? Like, no, it doesn't hurt. Do I need to move? I don't want to move. We're supposed to be here. Like brain just spirals sometimes. But that's like part of it is like, can you feel yourself being uncomfortable and stay in it? And that's okay, right? Because we are uncomfortable a lot throughout our lives. And if we try to resist the discomfort all the time, it's not going to get us anywhere good, right? But and I could give lots of advice on like tasks to do, things to do when you're feeling impatient. I actually looked it up on a couple of websites and almost all of them suggested like taking a slow deep breath and counting to 10 and like changing the situation if you can and doing I mean another option is basically like doing whatever it is yourself and never trusting anyone again, right? But all of those suggestions are just distracting yourself from feeling an emotion. And sometimes they're effective, sometimes it's all you need. But like literally distract yourself was listed as the top suggestions. And I'm here to tell you that that is only a temporary fix. Distracting yourself from an emotion means that you are not processing it. It's being resisted, it's being suppressed, it's being avoided, right? So it's probably just going to rear its head like sooner and even louder than last time, right? Pretty soon. So, and well, and also in the situation of, my spouse is not going as fast as I want to, right? How exhausting would it be if I just tried to distract myself the entire time until my partner's progress was like as fast as I thought it should be, right? Not helpful. And I'd be exhausted and like trying to constantly stay busy and trying to constantly distract myself. But yeah, it's not an effective long-term tool. It is not helping you prevent anything. It's not teaching you any new skills. It's not teaching you how to change your thought process. And actually, it might even reinforce the thing that's causing the impatience in the first place. Because like if you think about it from like a or like a boss employee perspective, so let's say like employees are doing tasks and the boss is being impatient, hovering, criticizing, poking holes in whatever. Like boss, all of a sudden, okay, I'm feeling impatient, I'm going to distract myself for a bit. So what's going to happen when the boss comes back and the like tasks are still not complete, even if the employees have been working diligently at it, right? In that scenario, the employees are just glad that the boss is distracted for a bit, but they still like fear them coming back before everything is completed. So if the timing isn't exactly right, then there's going to be more consequences and more criticism and more hovering and more, micromanaging, right? You're not trusted to complete the things that you need to get done in the time that it needs to take to get them done, right? So my suggestion for the boss is maybe to work on on like managing the impatience instead of trying to micromanage the people to do things, right? And obviously there's some give and take with all of it, but just one example. And the concept is the same for basically everywhere else impatience is showing up. So, impatience is a thing that happens when your brain is resisting reality. It's basically like brain saying, shouldn't this be done by now? It's taking too long. Like those sorts of thoughts on repeat. And we have the urge to rush things along. And it's brain doing normal brain things because once we see what we want it done now. We don't want to think about long term. We want it right now, right? So, what to do instead of distracting yourself from that? What I did in both the scenario with my spouse and the yoga thing, I identified what it was that I was feeling. So again, luckily the with my partner, I had a coach to help me really kind of dig in and figure out what was going on. But obviously, in the yoga class, it was a much smaller scale. And I was able to identify, like, oh, I'm feeling impatient right now. I want this to be over sooner than it is. So I went inside my body to describe the feelings that I was feeling. I realized that the physical sensations that I was experiencing were not harming me. And the the sensations that I was having from the emotion were also not harmful, right? So I listened to my brain, what it was saying, listened to the repeat mantra of this should be going faster, this should be over, right? I named it as impatience. And for me, that personally like takes a lot of the suffering out of it. I started to realize that it was a me problem, not a anyone else or anything else problem. And for me, that's good news because I can do something about me and how my brain thinks. And sometimes it's not it's not fun, right? I do sometimes throw tantrums about me having to be the one to change my own thought process because wouldn't it be nice if everyone around me could just do exactly what I think they should be doing at all times, right? That would solve everything. But I don't have that sort of control. I'm not a master of the universe, right? So I can I can like go inside and start to notice that, you know, I have the opportunity to see things differently. I can shift my perspective. And like with the yoga, I wasn't in pain. It was just that, I have to accept that I'm going to feel uncomfortable for a little bit. And it was an opportunity to allow that feeling to exist in my body and to practice feeling it for as long as it needed to be there. And here's where, like, there are options. And one of the options is to continue exactly as is. And that is a valid option. I can sit there feeling impatient and pushing and nudging and telling myself it shouldn't be this way and doing what my brain thinks is very helpful, but really it's not. And obviously, that long term isn't terribly helpful because brain gets to keep its obsession over trying to control everything, and it hyper focuses on all the bad in the situation. And like if we stick in this mindset without shifting it, you tend to miss out on a lot of opportunities for contentment and happiness in the situation. So like for the yoga thing, once I was able to accept the discomfort, I was able to explore what else was happening in my body. It felt really good to stretch. It probably was uncomfortable because I haven't done it very much recently. And this is something that's good for me, right? And sometimes that comes with discomfort, the things that are good for you. But yeah, the more time I spend in impatience, the less time I have to, feel happy or content or like any of the pleasant emotions, right? I'm taking away from my life and I'm spending more time frustrated. So I can choose to shift my perspective. That's another option. And I can realize again that I'm not the master of the universe and resisting the reality is only causing suffering for me. So I could choose as another option to coach myself into believing that everything is wonderful and rainbows and daisies all the time. And this is not my favorite. It's not even a little bit helpful for me because I would spend all of my time trying to believe that everything is wonderful. And life is kind of falls into the rules of thirds, right? Or you can say 50-50, but I like the rules of thirds better, where a third of the time you're going to feel crappy. A third of the time you're going to feel pretty neutral about things, whatever is going on, and then a third of the time you're going to feel good, right? But if I try to focus on how I shouldn't be feeling a certain way, then I spend more time there, right? So I can hold space for myself to be impatient. I can hold space for myself to like feel uncomfortable in the whole circumstance. And I recognize that the part of me that really wants this to be over is there, right? It's gonna suck. And I can be like, yeah, brain, thanks. This really does kind of suck. I'm gonna acknowledge that. I'm gonna give myself a hug, like an internal hug or like a physical hug, if that's helpful, because sometimes it really is. Sometimes you need a hug and you can give it to yourself, but like realizing that it's not going to last forever. So something in my relationship will shift. The yoga pose will end at some point. Like the line will be over at some point, or you just leave and then you're not in the line. You don't have to worry about it. Right. But choosing to look at the progress that has been made, working on my gratitude and feeling into it, also very helpful for me. Because when I took a step back and I really looked, I was like there was a lot more going on and progress being made than I was giving any credit for. So the work on the relationship has come a long way, even in the last couple of months since we've been on this journey. And it turns out that I am really proud of what we're doing. And it makes sense that we're not using rocket fuel to race to the end, right? I don't want it to be that way because I want to experience the journey. And in my yoga pose, I was significantly less uncomfortable at the end than I was at the beginning because my leg was stretching as it was supposed to. And that felt a lot better by the end. And I was happy with that. I was more stretched out. I was feeling a little bit more flexible. Like it felt physically better. And I can see both of these examples as opportunities to practice the steps that I have been taking, finding the impatience in the process, or sorry, finding patience in the process instead of the impatience, and just repeating that as many times as I need. And that makes it feel so much better for me. So, and I don't know about you, but I like it when I can manage my own emotions and enjoy my life just a little bit more without anybody having to say or do anything differently, because I don't have to stay in that negative space. And instead of staying in the negative all the time, curbing, like being able to work with the impatience that is bound to pop up because we're human, practicing like living a human life, experiencing human emotions, right? I get to practice holding space for myself to feel, letting it pass. And it helps me be in a lot more control of my life instead of letting circumstances kind of dictate how I feel all the time. For me, that is much better. So I hope this was helpful.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Many of you will be able to take the ideas that you've heard and apply them in your daily life, and that's really all you need. That's amazing. But for those of you who could use a little one on one help with how to make these things actually work for you in your real life, please reach out. The link to schedule a consult with me is in the show notes. You don't have to do this alone. See you soon.